What's going on, YouTube? It is time for another custom. Today we are doing the 69 Dodge Charger Daytona. I'm not a huge fan of this casting. It seems pretty high off the ground with some small tires. I'd like to see it slam down a little bit, some big old meats in the back, and some smaller tires up front. But the paint job is pretty freaking cool. Gotta love those flames and the Daytona in the back. So this particular car is going to be for the racetrack, and we're going to focus on adding some weight, maybe doing a tire swap. We'll see. We'll run it down the track and see what time we get, and see if we need to swap the tires or not, or just work on the ones we got. So let's crack it open and take a look at what we got. This thing is sweet. It's got a couple scratches on the roof and stuff, but pretty cool car. Wonder if I can work on lowering this thing. I like it, but I'm gonna make it a lot better. So this particular car is going to go to Diecast 64, and we're gonna take a crack at some of their races. So he has a weight limit of 57 grams. So looks like we're shooting to add about 12 to 13 grams here, which isn't a whole lot. So we'll take a look and see what we can do. Before we get started, let's run it down the scale quarter mile and see what time we get. 2.363 seconds. That's respectable, but we're going to have to do a lot better for Diecast 64. Let's see if we can improve on that time. The car actually rolls pretty well, so I'm not going to worry about a wheel swap. I'm just going to work on these wheels and try and make them roll better. First things first, just like every other custom, we drill out the post and completely disassemble the car. This car being brand new, everything's in pretty good shape, and I'm only really worried about the windshield, the body, and the base, and the tires. The clear coat on these new Hot Wheels is actually really good, and it takes a while for the paint stripper to break that down to get to the paint to lift it off. So what I did on this one was I went over the entire casting with some sandpaper, scuffed it up pretty good, and then I put the citrus strip paint stripper on there, and it did a really good job. It really cut down on the time it took to lift the paint off. Once the paint is looking all crusty and nasty like this, it's a good time to remove it. I just go over the entire casting with a brush, knocking off all the loose paint. And then once I'm done with that, I'll run it under some warm soapy water and go over it with some steel wool. Make sure I get all the paint off. I think sanding the car down a little bit before putting the paint stripper on really helped this process out. And I'll probably be doing that on most of the cars I do in the future. This casting's in pretty good shape. There weren't a whole lot of casting errors or anything like that. I'm going to be using a paint and primer, so I'm not going to worry about getting this casting to a mirror shine before I paint it. I primed it with Rust-Oleum Sandable Primer, and I taped off the areas that I wanted to keep white. I thought this would be a paint scheme that maybe this car would have been rolling around in the 60s, 70s with. So this is what I went with. I used Krylon Color Masters True Blue. I've used this paint before, and it turned out really well. This casting is just so big, I didn't want to have one solid color and it just looked like a chunk of color rolling down the track. So I thought it was a good idea to break it up with the two different colors on there. And it turned out really well. This is actually before I put any clear coat on it, and I'm really happy with it. Once it was all painted up, I just kind of felt like it needed something more. So I found some numbers lying around, and I thought number 7 would be a good number to put on there. I went over the car with Duplicolor clear coat, but as you have probably already noticed, I left the windshield in there and messed it up pretty good. But I think I'll just leave it in there. I added a little bit of weight using fishing sinkers, and I ended up painting the front and back end of the base to kind of match and give it a little cleaner look. I used Gorilla Glue gel to secure the wheels and axles in place. I've been having a little bit of problem with the Gorilla Glue being too brittle and not quite holding things in place the way I want them. So I'm probably going to be moving away from the Gorilla Glue. I'm using 256 by 3/16 button head screws. I found these on Amazon. I think I got a pack of 100 for $8 or $11, so not a bad price. These are self-tapping screws, and they work really well. I haven't had any issues with them. One thing to watch for when using these screws, well, any screw for that matter, I guess, if for whatever reason you have to remove these screws, and when you start screwing it back in, you immediately feel resistance, then you need to stop, remove the screw, and try again, because you are going to strip that hole out, and it's going to be pretty useless trying to use any screws to tighten that down. You're going to end up having to glue it. So there it is, all put back together. I'm kind of on the fence on this one. It's sitting too tall. I screwed up the windshield, but it rolls well, and I do like the paint job. Let's see what our total weight is. 56.9 grams, right there under the 57 gram limit for Diecast 64. Let's run it down the track and see if we can improve on that time. 2.234 seconds. We improved, but we're gonna have to get a little bit more speed out of it if we want to be competitive over at Diecast 64. That windshield was just driving me nuts, so fortunately I had another Dodge Daytona around, and I took the windshield out of that, and I was able to put in this one. Another thing that I wasn't really liking was the blue rims, so I went over them with some white paint, and I think it ties it into the paint job a little bit better. I still think the car's sitting too tall, and I think ultimately that's what's kind of throwing this whole build off for me a little bit, is just the stance is a little bit too tall, and I should have probably worked on lowering it, kind of like I said at the beginning of the video, but I didn't think it would be that big of a deal, and it just kind of thrown it all off for me a little bit. This is meant to go down the track, so when I do get it back from Diecast 64, I think that's going to be the plan, is to lower it, and I think that'll greatly improve the overall look of the car. Thank you guys for watching, and leave a comment down below with what you think, and we will see you on the next one.